Raising the Bets is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to Raising the Bets. We're a Catholic couple raising 5 kids outside of Boston. Join us as we share the joys and challenges of marriage, homeschool, and our adventures near and far as we make sense of the world and experience the best parts of our culture. I'm Don Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
So, Melanie, it's been a bit of a slow week for us this week. We haven't done a whole lot. I think we're kind of recovering from visits and stuff. Like we go through these bursts of activity. Plus, I was really busy at work.
So, you're wicked busy.
Jimmy and I were recording a whole bunch of stuff that you guys are going to enjoy if you're listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. We got a lot of stuff coming up in June and beginning of July that we were recording. But we did go to the farmer's market this week, which is our usual summertime thing. And there was a new vendor there. And it's a bakery. And we bought some croissants.
So good. Oh my gosh.
They were
really good. We can't afford them every week because they were not cheap croissants, but
no,
they were so pillowy, but flaky.
Yeah.
And like dark chocolate. So good.
And it's the big family problem. Like 5 croissants. It was like nearly $30. It was like $27 something for 5 croissants. That was expensive. Those croissants were like over $5 each, weren't they? That's over $5 each.
No. $4 each.
With tax, it was 27 something. So that's over $5 for 5.
It was 24.
Okay. Anyway, well, it kind of brings the point is, so I always pay with the Apple Pay if I can, and so I hold my watch up and it, dings, and then the guy who was, checking me out.
Lady.
Okay. Let's be clear here. I'm not sure. It was kind of indeterminate. For me, there was a sort of a masculine-ish voice. I couldn't, and plus he or she had a mask on, so I wasn't. But it was like a short haircut. I don't know. These days, who knows? Like what Lord knows what you're supposed to call anyone. Anyway, regardless, the person held up the iPad for me to finish, and it had tip amounts I could pick 10, 15, 20, or no tip. I'm on the spot. Like, what do I do? I hit no tip. Like, you literally just handed me a handful of croissants. Why am I tipping you?
If you had paid for cash, would you have dropped money in the tip? With cash, would you have dropped money in the tip jar?
No. I mean, if they'd hand me back a quarter, I might have thrown a quarter in the tip jar. But probably not. So this raises the question is, when do we tip? Why and when do we tip? Now, obviously, at a restaurant, you tip your waiter because in America, your waiters are not getting paid their regular wage, which they should be. They're actually living on the tips. The tips are part of their salary. It's what they need those tips to make a living. So you always tip a waiter. In America, anyway, and in other countries too, but it's not just for good service. This is the basic, okay? But where else do you tip? Like, I was thinking about this because I felt uncomfortable afterward. Should I have tipped? Did that person look at me like saying no tip and go jerk? Like, did they think less of me? Was I wrong? So, why and when do we tip? There are lots of times when we're expected to tip or we're given that opportunity. Like if you go to Dunkin' Donuts every day, say you're one of those people who go regularly, you get to know the person who makes your coffee. You kind of form a relationship. So you put money in the tip jar,
But do you put money every time or do you put money in sometimes?
I know that there are people who put money in every time because they pay with cash and they change. But this is the other thing is now when you're doing like the electronic payments, there isn't always like when I go to Dunkin' Donuts. So every Friday I do the food shopping. Usually you went this week, and I take my helpers, whichever children are my helpers, which is usually Sophie and Lucy. I take them to Dunkin' Donuts afterward and buy them a donut, and I get a nice coffee. I get a donut, and then but I pay using the app. Like there's no opportunity to tip in the app. I'm not digging out my wallet to pull out a cash to throw in the tip jar. So I don't really tip him at Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, I've never tipped because I usually pay with a card and it doesn't ask you for a tip when you pay with a card.
Right. But there's always a cup. Now, when I go to Red Eye Roasters, it does this. It has an iPad. It does the same thing. It asks if you want to leave a tip. I always leave a tip. But they're making me a coffee. Like
they're crafting you a coffee.
Right.
It's like a fancy handcrafted coffee.
I don't always get a fancy handcrafted coffee, but you get a fancy handcrafted coffee. So even if I'm just getting a regular, brewed coffee, I still tip. But it's I don't know. It feels different in a coffee shop where I don't know. I've had to like when I go to like the pizza place, and I'm ordering a sub or a pizza, and there's a tip jar. Like, why would I tip them for handing me food across the counter? Like, I'm like, especially if it's the owner of the place, because like I go to Holbrook House of Pizza sometimes for if I need to buy a sub for lunch, if I'm get a sub.
Okay.
I like their subs. But the guys behind the counter are the owners during lunch, the lunch rush. Like, why would I tip? Like, I'm already buying the thing from you. Why would I put a tip in the jar? I don't know. So I'm going to throw it out to the listeners. What do you do? When do you tip? When do you not tip? When there's a jar there? Like, do you always feel obligated to tip when there's a jar there?
Yeah, I've noticed that like the jerk place also has like a tip.
You got to specify the jerk place.
The Jamaican jerk.
The Jamaican takeout place.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never tip that jerk. No. Yeah.
But yeah, they like if I pay with a card, they give me the iPad and it has like room for a tip. And yeah, I'm never really sure like what the etiquette is for tipping for counter service. Like when they're just filling you a plate full of food.
Yeah. And it's awkward because not like you gonna tip me? They're gonna hand in you the thing, and it's like I want this to be secret. Like I don't want you to know if I'm tipping you. But if
it was a tip jar, they would know.
I know. Yeah, I know. A tip jar doesn't feel as forward as the iPad where I have to press a button, because with the tip jar I can ignore it. Like, I can just pretend it's not there. But with the thing I have to complete the transaction, there's no ignoring that. I have to press something. I have to press either some amount of tip or no tip. That is a positive action I have to take.
As opposed to just not.
As opposed to taking no action and moving on. I think it's an interesting etiquette question. I don't think there's a solid answer either.
There used to be a blog. Do you remember? It was
The Waiter.
The Waiter.
Yes, it was an awesome blog, and he wrote a book about tipping.
Right, but I think he kind of covered some of that, like the when do you tip, which like he was in New York City, and I think he did some of like the etiquette of tipping, like who do you tip and how much and when and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm just see if I can find it. It was a great blog. I mean, like he wrote about. Just experiences of being a waiter.
Right, just like really good stories.
He was a good storyteller, good writer. I wonder what he ended up doing. I wonder if I could even find it now, because there's like a whole bunch of other waiter blogs out there now. Yeah, he literally wrote the book on tipping. Although I never read it. I meant to read it once, but maybe he's got. Although again, the etiquette has changed because now we get the Apple Pay and the iPads and it's different now. So I don't know. I'd love to hear what other people do, how you handle tipping, especially in the non-traditional places. Like not like obviously you tip your waiters, but in the other situations, when do you tip? Like I'll often tip if it's clear, like it's teenagers, right? You know what I mean? Like at an ice cream stand, and their kids, working their summer job, or you know what I mean? Encourage the good work, especially if they're polite and helpful. I'll throw like if someone is making me an ice cream cone or a sundae, I'll tip that because that's work. They've got to craft that. I mean, crafting an ice cream cone is not the hardest thing in the world, but it's work still. You know what I mean? Pouring a coffee, or I don't know. I mean, making a sub is kind of crafting a thing. I don't know. You can tell it's been bugging me.
Yeah, I can tell it's been eating at you.
It's been eating at me. Anyway, so let me know what you think. You can email betts, BETTS at sqpn.com, or I would love if folks would go to the sqpn.com/discord and join our Discord community, and we can have a conversation about it. That would be really nice. I would love to talk with folks about what they do, and I could then, follow up with questions and see what, and get some more information. So in any case, so that's only sort of newsy, stuff we've been doing, sort of question.
Yeah, I meant to take a field trip on Friday, actually. And then I remembered that Thursday was the Feast of the Ascension, and therefore, I couldn't, we had to do the grocery shopping on Friday, and I couldn't bump it to Thursday or bump the field trip to Thursday, because Thursday was like, we have to go to Mass.
Right. Because we were in the Archdiocese of Boston, which, like most of the Northeast and Nebraska, for some reason, I'm not sure why Nebraska got roped in, but we still have Ascension Thursday. We have not shunted it to Sunday. So it was a holy day of obligation, and we went to Mass, and we went to not our regular parish, because their schedule, their holy day schedules at our regular parish are kind of weird, but we went to the noon Mass at the next town over, St. Francis of Assisi in Braintree, which was good. And we got to see Father Sean Carey.
Yeah, I love Mass with Father Sean.
So Father Sean, we've mentioned it before, he's a deaf priest.
And he says Mass in American Sign Language.
Yes, and he has an interpreter who voices the words.
The kids were commenting that it was very strange because his interpreter this time was female. And so she's saying all the words of the Mass, for him.
Right.
He's signing them, but she's interpreting. And so she's saying the words of consecration. And they said it was very strange to hear the words of consecration in a female voice.
Yeah. And I'm sure I was thinking about that. I'm sure that was a big theological discussion. Can a deaf priest sign the words of consecration? Will that confect the Eucharist? Will that cause transubstantiation to occur?
It is a real language.
It is a real language. And the way he does it is he will lift up the host and sign with one hand.
Yes. But with the chalice, he signs
first
and then picks up the chalice.
Yes.
I noticed when he was doing the elevation, he first elevated the host and then signed, "Behold the Lamb of God."
Yes.
I was curious because you obviously can't elevate the host and sign "Behold the Lamb of God" at the same time. So you have to say which comes first, elevating the host and then saying it, or saying it and then elevating. It's fascinating. But sign language is a beautiful language. I understand maybe like 5 words.
Right.
I figured out
a handful of words.
I figured out the signs for
Christ
and Lord, which is almost the same sign. It looks like he's drawing the the
vestment, the deacon's vestment, the
sash.
The sash.
It's not really a sash.
Stole. Thank you.
But the one that goes across the chest.
Right.
But for Lord, it's like with a sort of L shape.
His hand is in an L shape. And
for Christ, his hand is in a C shape as he's doing the across from one shoulder down to the waist.
All right.
I already knew the one for Jesus because I learned that as a kid, which is you point to this stigmata on your hands. You point one forefinger to the middle of one palm and then the other forefinger to the middle of the other palm.
Oh, I know Alleluia because of all the cheesy hand signs, Alleluias for all the youth ministry things.
Kind of a complicated sign, like it's a series of gestures, and I can't never remember them in the right order.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then there's applause.
But Alleluia kind of reminds me of the sign for joy, which is kind of a.
Well, I'm sure it's related.
I'm sure it's probably like some part of the sign. Anyway, but it almost. It's kind of some beautiful, like graceful rhythm musical quality to it.
When he does the distribution of communion, how does he do body? How does he say body of Christ? Does he do it one-handed?
I don't remember.
Because we didn't go to him for communion. I think we went to a Eucharistic minister, right?
Yeah, he was on the other side. And so I can't
remember from the when we've gone to mass with him before. But so he does a homily, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on when we get to that.
His homily was really good.
Yeah. But the interpreter interprets it, and she's also interpreting for him. So she's signing the songs, the words of the hymns, and
the words of the
congregation,
the readings, and the congregation's responses. So he can follow along. Like, he can't obviously hear the hymns or the psalm, and so she's like letting him know where we are in the mass.
And she's sitting right in the front row, and she's got the books in front of her, the books of the prayers, and the lectionary, the sacramentary, and she's got everything there in front of her to work from. So. Yeah. And she's got a microphone so that the congregation can hear her.
I was curious as to whether he gave her his homily ahead of time or if she was like translating on the spot.
I think she was translating on the spot because I didn't see him reading anything. So he would have had to have been reading something for her to be following along from a written text.
I suppose that's true.
And she wasn't looking down. She was looking at him. And that's the other thing is whenever you're talking to a deaf person, you always look at the deaf person. You never look at the interpreter. You listen to the interpreter, but you look at the person who's speaking, which is the deaf person. So that's like a key thing. So when he's saying the prayers, don't look at the interpreter who's like in the row in front of you. You look at him in the sanctuary. Yeah,
I can't imagine wanting to. I mean, I like watching him just to follow along as best I can. Not that I can follow much of it, but
it's a natural tendency though that we look at the person who's speaking. It's ingrained in us. I was saying this to Jimmy yesterday, actually, when we were recording. When we record our podcast, I have the texts of what we're talking about in front of me, and I have the window with his image off to the side, and the texts are right in front of me where the camera. I have to look at the camera and not at his image, and it's very hard. It's much harder to be focused and to talk to him without looking at his image off to the side.
Right.
And we are naturally ingrained in us to look at the person who's speaking.
That's one reason why Zoom has that uncanny quality, because you're not really making eye contact. You're kind of looking in the general direction of the person you're talking to, but the camera usually doesn't line up. You're looking at their image, not at your camera.
Apple has this new FaceTime thing. I don't know if you've noticed it, where it uses machine learning to alter your eyes so that you're looking directly at the person instead of at the camera. It
changes your eyes?
Yes, it changes the eye line. So it looks like the person on your screen is looking at you as opposed to at the camera. Now, there was some complaint about that at first, and so they might have turned it off, but they were doing. I know that they were initially doing that.
That's kind of uncanny.
Yeah. Well, if you don't notice it, you don't notice it. So yeah.
But if you do notice it, it's kind of creepy.
It can be kind of creepy. They're changing your face, the way your eyes look.
To make you more socially acceptable.
Well, to make the FaceTime more socially acceptable, to make the experience more like talking to a person in front of you, as opposed to being mediated through this machine. And because ideally what they want to do is someday put the camera behind the screen.
Right.
So that you're looking directly at the camera when you're talking to the person on the screen.
It's just really tricky technologically speaking.
Yes, they're getting there. It's actually, there's been a few tries by certain manufacturers, phone manufacturers, not all of them successful, but if anybody can do it, Apple will figure it out. They'll eventually get there with it. But yeah, it's kind of wacky to think about. There are some setups where you can put this thing on the top of your monitor, and so the camera is literally in the middle of your monitor. It's hanging down in the middle of your monitor, so that when you're talking to your Zoom, it's like you're talking straight at the camera. And so it's obstructing the middle of your monitor.
Oh, but you could maybe put the windows so that if you had a big enough monitor, you could arrange
the windows right, like behind it or around it. Like you could put the image of the person right behind it so that you're talking to the person and the camera's right in front of their face or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, this is far afield for the thing. Anyway, we went to Ascension Thursday Mass, and that kind of messed up our plans which is fine. I mean, better mass than anything else, but it kind of messed up our plans for planning to go to the Museum of Fine Arts again, which we have not been to in more than 2 years, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
It's wild. Yeah. Speaking of going places, I just want to bring this up because I just read about this. There's this zoo in the Netherlands, I think it is. It might be Germany, it might be the Netherlands. I think it's the Netherlands. I think it's Rotterdam, in fact, where people, when you go to the exhibit to look at the gorillas, you have to wear these special paper glasses that have eyes drawn on them. Like you can see through it, but from the gorilla's point of view, the eyes drawn on it are looking down, so you're not making eye contact. See, they're not actually sure how strong gorillas are. So when they build gorilla enclosures, they're kind of making a guess at how strong they have to be. And what happens is if you make eye contact with gorillas for too long, that's an act of aggression and they will attack. So there was this lady who was kind of obsessed with this gorilla in the zoo. And she went every day to see him. And she had been going ever since he was a baby. He was born. And she's been going to see him every day, making eye contact and smiling at him, even though the keepers have been telling her, don't do this. That's a sign of aggression. No. He and I have a special bond. He likes it. He doesn't like it. In fact, he broke out of the enclosure and attacked her and then like pinned her to the ground and took a bite out of her, like shoulder or something like that. Broke her arm and wrist.
Oh my goodness.
She doesn't blame him. He's still her special guy. And so not a problem. She forgives him and he's still special to her. Okay. But like, I was thinking from the point of view of the girl, like this lady comes here every day and stares me down. She's like really aggressive. I can't take it anymore. I just gotta make her stop. Anyway.
So she thought that they were friends and he thought that they were enemies.
She thought they were friends. Gorillas break out of zoos all the time. The little Joe at the Franklin Park Zoo has broken out twice.
I remember that.
Even tried to catch a bus. They caught him at a bus stop. They literally caught him at a bus stop.
He wasn't actually going to.
I don't think he was trying to catch a bus. He was just resting after having run around Roxbury for a while. This is a zoo in the middle of the city. Man. Anyway, let's move on to the food stuff we've been eating. We had one interesting new recipe we tried. Thai grilled pork skewers, or muping. I like saying that, muping. And I need to find it in my list of recipes. You've been adding a lot of recipes lately because you're planning on making an apple fritter cake, and I am looking forward to that.
One of these days.
One of these days. Well, you bought the apples, so that's going to be while the apples are still good. So you take pork shoulder, or in our case, was it tenderloin or pork loin? I think it was a loin.
I think it was a pork. It wasn't a tenderloin. It was just a pork loin.
Tenderloin would be too tender, too soft. So you need some. So the recipe calls for pork shoulder, but pork loin worked okay.
Yeah,
and
it was a little bit tough actually. I think I wanted something a little bit more tender.
Yeah, it might have actually worked better. So you partially freeze the meat and then you slice it into strips,
or in our case, we had the meat in the freezer and I partially defrosted it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that always gets me about recipes from these big like cooking magazines and cookbooks. Is the assumption is always that the meat is fresh.
Right. Not that you've had to defrost it from the freezer.
You've just gone to your local butcher who has cut you a piece just for this recipe, and you've brought it home to make for your family dinner tonight. Not, I have a freezer stocked full of meat I've bought on sale, and what am I going to make tonight?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's an unwritten assumption there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I partially defrosted it, and then I cut it really thin. It's supposed to be 1/4 inch.
This is 1/8 of an inch thick.
Or 1/8 of an inch. I think that it was mine were actually probably a little bit too thick. I'm not sure I got it down to 1/8 of an inch.
I don't think you were. 1/8 of an inch is very thin. That's shaving it thin.
I'm very not good at eyeballing measurements.
Yeah.
Of less than an inch.
This is why you need a meat cutter, like the electric, the spinning blade.
Yeah, I don't want one of those. Thank you.
At one point or another in every man's life, he wants one of those. And then his wife shoots him down. So,
Yeah.
because you'll cut your hand off, was the argument.
Well, in your case,
I'm not sure
probably.
why. I'm not sure why this scurrilous accusation would be handed against me, so to speak. But yes. In any case, you slice the meat into these ribbons,
And then you marinate
strips,
it.
and then you marinate it. And let's see,
And
garlic,
then you skewer it.
cilantro, brown sugar, fish sauce, and soy sauce. Calls for peanut oil. We don't have any peanut oil, so
I just use canola oil.
Canola oil
or vegetable oil, whatever the heck we had in the pantry.
And white pepper. And then
I was dubious about the white pepper, but I went ahead and followed the recipe as written.
It worked.
It was okay.
Yeah. Then you let it marinate for at least 2 hours. Then you thread the pork onto skewers. And so when it's threaded it's like back and forth. So you take the ribbon and you take it the long way, and this was kind of hard to do because the pork kept falling apart. But you're basically folding it on back and forth. It's hard to describe in a podcast, but it's almost like a sine wave. In any case, but you're pushing it on and you kind of pack it on there tight. That's the idea. It's almost like a shawarma sort of thing where you're packing the meat in there tight, and then you throw it on the grill and you char it, for a couple of minutes over the fire, turn it, and then baste it with coconut milk, and you keep turning and basting with coconut milk the whole time. And it was good. And you serve it with the chili lime sauce, the Jiu, which is a Thai and I think Vietnamese too. I think it's similar in Vietnamese cooking.
I think it's similar, but not the same.
It's not exactly the same. So it's Jiu. I'm probably saying it wrong. Has fish sauce, lime juice. That's a complicated one. This was one that's more. I used the one that was less complicated. Lime juice, fish sauce, brown sugar, chili garlic sauce.
We didn't have enough lime, and I think that I did kind of miss the extra lime boost.
Right. I tried to add the zest and the lime pulp, but yeah, it wasn't. It would have been better to have more lime.
I also thought it came out. It was a little bit too chewy.
Yeah.
Like maybe marinating it longer might have tenderized it a bit more,
or a different cut. Yeah.
And it got a little bit too charred for my taste. It was a little bit.
I did
dark on some of the tips.
Yeah, I did kind of lose track of the cooking right off the bat, and it got burnt the first turn.
But I'd like to do it again. Sorry, I'd like to do it again.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I think pork loin has a line of fat running through it. It's like it was two muscles.
Right.
And so I think that was where the chewy bit came in. I noticed as I was threading it. So we had that with a stir fry that you made, a vegetable stir fry.
Yeah, usually I find that I'm always slightly disappointed in veggie stir fries that don't have any meat in them. Like I miss the meaty flavor. But this one, since you'd used half the can of coconut milk for the
basting
of the skewers, I used the other half in my stir fry sauce, and I found that actually kind of boosted the umami flavor and made the veggies a little bit less bland. Yeah,
it was good. I liked it. I mean, as a Thai vegetable stir fry, it worked out really well. Yeah, we have to remember it's lime season. When we go to the store, we need to make sure we're buying extra limes. When I was a kid, limes were wicked expensive. Like you didn't get lemons and limes all the time.
Mostly when I was a kid, I remember having the plastic bottle of lime juice that was shaped like a lime.
Yes, that was what everyone had that because that was cheaper because it was fake, concentrate. And it was cheaper than buying the real thing. Same thing with like red bell peppers. Red bell peppers were like rich people food. Like if you had bell pepper, it was a green bell pepper.
I don't remember red bell peppers being in the store.
Well, we would see them like at the market, like at the like in Boston, the street market, Haymarket, where my dad, it's the old fashioned Haymarket. We'd see them there, but generally if you saw them, they were too expensive. It's interesting just how so many foods that were they were so expensive when I was a kid are now just commonly available. And I'm curious the story of how they became cheaper. I remember listening to a podcast from America's Test Kitchen's Proof, where they talked about celery. Celery used to be rich people food.
which is really weird to think of now because like it's almost poor people food now.
Yeah, I mean they had like special serving dishes, and they had celery sodas, and like it was a health food for rich people. But now it's a common food. It's just kind of funny how food does that.
They also had like all sorts of fancy varieties of celery.
Oh yes, there were heirloom varieties of all kinds, which is the other part of the problem is we've lost so much of the. They talked to a guy actually who's been trying to revive and find the seeds for all these varieties. Like they had like candy striped ones, like.
Excuse me.
You need to stop yawning into the microphone.
I'm really tired.
I guess so. Anyway, so that was the stir fry. The other thing we want to talk about in food though is we have a new Instant Pot. We've had an Instant Pot for a number of years, and we've talked about how we don't use it very often because it's too small. We're a family of 7, and you can only make so much in it at a time. So we tended to use it for making stock very quickly for one soup. So one soup's worth of stock, or beans or pulled pork or that sort of thing. But then I saw that they had a bigger one. They had an 8-quart Instant Pot. And I put it on, there's a service called camel.com where you can put in any.
That's camel, like the animal.
3 times.
The hump.
Yes. 3 times. I have no idea.
When you say that, the first like 6 times you said it, I thought you were saying camo, like camouflage.
Oh, sorry. I'm saying it in my Boston accent.
Yes.
Camel.
Yes.
.com
with an L.
With an L. I don't know what the name signifies, but what you do with it is you can put anything from Amazon in there and then say, when it hits this price, send me a message. And so that's what I've done for a bunch of things on my wish list and that sort of stuff. But I put that on there and it will tell you the historic pricing of it over time. And so I said, when it gets down to this low price that it hits every once in a while, this very good deal, let me know. And it did. And so we got a really good deal on it, and it came, and it's the new one. It's very fancy, and it's really nice because one of the problems with the original Instant Pot was it has this inner liner pot, and if you ever want to take it out after the food is done cooking and pour out what's in it, there was no handle. You had to grab the hot, very thin edge with towels or wherever. It was very hard to get at. Well, the new one has these handles that kind of stick out that aren't inside the pot when it cooks. So they're cool to the touch and they're very easy to grab. And the pot can be put on the stovetop. It has a lined bottom. So you can actually use it on your stovetop as a regular pot, the inner liner, which we did tonight for dinner.
Right. Actually, tonight, I didn't have a big enough pot to boil potatoes in. And so I ended up using the Instant Pot.
We had pots that were too big and pots that were too small. And this was just right.
It was the Goldilocks pot.
It was the Goldilocks pot. And I have to recommend this Instant Pot because the 8-quart Instant Pot, for if you have a big family, this is a great size Instant Pot. And so I made a beef stew in it. How do they describe it? The absolute best Instant Pot beef stew. I'm going to say not the absolute best.
I hope it's not the absolute best because I'm hoping for better next time.
Right. It was okay. So things I would do differently. So one of the things it did was it said had you add beef broth, but it said don't add too much because there's a sealed cooking environment. It doesn't lose as much liquid, so you don't need to add so much liquid. That was wrong. If I make this again, or when I make this again, I would add wine to it because
it needed wine. I always add wine to my stews and soups, and it tasted flat.
Right. And I would add more broth because it just wasn't brothy enough. And the day later, it was all pretty dry. In fact, I would add mushrooms. They didn't have mushrooms on it. We were out of mushrooms. But I also added celery. They didn't have celery on it.
That's weird.
Yeah, that was weird. Celery is classic. And then, what was the other thing I would do? Oh, they want you to use a cornstarch slurry to thicken it up after it's done pressure cooking. But I just used Wondra, which is the very finely ground flour. And I just put some of that in there and thickened it up. And that worked out pretty well. I like for stews, I like flour better than cornstarch.
Yeah. Is a thickener.
I think the texture is better. The flavor in texture is better. So it was good. It was good. It could have been better. But what I'm really happy about is just finding the the big Instant Pot and being able to start using that for more things. So that's going to be good. All right. So that's what we've been eating. Let's talk about things we've been watching and reading.
I have not watched anything except stuff. I mean, stuff that we watched with the family, but I didn't watch anything on my own.
Okay, so let's talk about stuff we did watch. So we watched the first 2 episodes of Kenobi, the new Star Wars series,
which was good.
I've heard mixed reviews from people, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few people say they really didn't like it, but they weren't specific about what they didn't like about it, which I found kind of frustrating.
One person I saw criticized the casting of the little girl who plays Leia. They thought she was terrible. I don't understand that. I think she reads as younger than 10. Like she's supposed to be 10 years old.
I definitely would not have pegged the actress as 10. In
fact, we looked up her age and she's actually 9 when they filmed it. And Lucy's 9. And this girl, this actress, like when she runs like a 6-year-old. She looks like a 6-year-old when she's running.
Yeah, I felt like she was precocious in terms of like how she talked, but in terms of how she moved, she felt like she moved like a much younger child.
Yeah.
Which was disconcerting.
Almost like maybe she has like a form of stunted growth, like dwarfism or something. But she didn't have the classic look of dwarfism, which is like you have abnormally short limbs, but your head and your torso
proportions.
Yeah, the proportions seem normal on her. So she just was small. I guess Carrie Fisher was 5'1", so maybe they're trying to duplicate that. Well, in any case, I think some of the criticisms might be, and again, I'd have to hear like if people respond to this, but might be because people were expecting Kenobi to be something different at this point. It takes place 10 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith. So 10 years after the Empire wins, the Jedi are defeated, Anakin becomes Darth Vader, and the Luke and Leia have been separated, and Luke is living on Tatooine with his aunt and uncle, and Kenobi is there to watch over him and to be in hiding because the Jedi are being hunted. And I think maybe people felt like Kenobi, they didn't expect Kenobi to be in hiding and denying his Jedi-ness, and they thought he'd be
more heroic.
Yeah, like Clint Eastwood in the old spaghetti westerns, the man with no name, doing good deeds, striding through the wastes, the wilderness, and righting wrongs and that sort of thing.
Maybe. I also wonder, like, I would be curious to see people who liked it versus didn't like it. How many of them had watched like the animated Clone Wars and Rebels series?
Right.
Because I felt like we, having watched those series, had maybe different set of expectations for the character arc.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's precisely it. Is the more immersed you are, I think in it, you might have had different expectations.
Which might be a criticism, because I felt like The Mandalorian stood on its own. Like, well, there was no other show that was informing it.
All the characters were in the first season. All the characters were new. So
I wonder if Kenobi is sort of calling up on the Clone Wars series, and in terms of the antagonists, the Inquisitors came from the Rebels TV show.
Right. But
like, I think that our kids were very excited to see the live action versions of the Inquisitors.
I get that. But the Kenobi, we expected to see, like, if you only ever seen A New Hope, you expect to see Kenobi in the desert, looking over Luke. So maybe they expected it. Well, I don't want to spoil it too much, but maybe they expected the events of the series to be different, like the things that Kenobi is doing to be different from what he's doing. I don't know. It's kind of, I mean, where it's going to end, which is Kenobi doesn't die in this series.
Right.
Right.
And he doesn't like reveal himself to Luke in the series. So, I mean, before we watched it, I was wondering what is the story going to be about?
Right.
Because as far as we know, all that happened between the end of
Revenge of the
Sith and the beginning of New Hope is like Obi-Wan hangs out in the desert on Tatooine pretending to be like crazy old hermit Ben.
Right. That crazy old wizard out in the beyond the Dune Sea. Yeah. But I mean, the what they have him doing is actually pretty good. It's a clever story to tell because they're working within some very strict constraints here, and I think it works. I think it's working for me.
Right. It's hard to tell a story that's in between two other stories that hasn't been told, like, and make it feel new and fresh. So there is an interesting constraint, and I think that actually is part of the intrigue for me. Like, how are they going to work within those constraints? It's kind of like a sonnet or a haiku, something that's very small and polished.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there's, I mean, I'm liking it so far. I'm not saying I don't like it. I think I'm more excited though about like the next season of The Mandalorian or the
Ahsoka series.
I have to say, while I'm enjoying Kenobi, it's not as exciting.
This wasn't the series that I was pining for.
It's not as exciting. The storyline it's a smaller story. It's not a bigger story.
Mm-hmm. And it's one season. It's one and done.
Right. And it's not like The Mandalorian where we're breaking new ground. So it's kind of a weird fish.
Right. Well, because by the end of it that the Jedi aren't restored and the Empire defeated. You know where this story ends. It has to end in the place it begins, in a sense.
Right. So then the question is there a possibility for a true character arc, true growth and change, and
I think there is
forward.
I think where the Kenobi we see at the beginning of this is very different from the Kenobi we see at the beginning of A New Hope, and I think it's the events of this series that give him that create that Kenobi, that give him that attitude and hope. And one of the things he's been sent to do by Yoda is to study the ways of Qui-Gon Jinn about how to become a Force ghost and commune with the dead Jedi. And I think that's going to be something that's going to happen in this series.
That would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Because that's always been kind of like behind the scenes, wave your hand. We don't really know how that works. It would be interesting to see if we learned a little bit more about the mechanism of the whole Force ghost thing.
Well, it came up in the Clone Wars series, but you don't remember that. Yoda went and did it.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah. It was in the abbreviated 6th season. It was the very end of the original series.
I have a feeling I'm going to at some point want to go back and see some of those again.
You're probably going to want to go see those again. All right, we need to move on because there's a lot more to talk about.
Right.
We watched the second episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier,
which I love. The first episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier doesn't really bring Bucky and Sam together. We have two stories intercut, and it's setting them up. And you need that. Like you need to have that set up. Yes. And I think it took just as long as it needs to take. But in the second episode, we finally get them thrown together.
And they become the odd couple.
I love the dynamic between them.
The big three. Our enemies are always one of the big three.
I mean, it's a very interesting
aliens,
androids, and wizards.
Aliens, androids, and wizards. Right. There are no wizards.
But
Doctor Strange.
But the dynamic between the two of them, they're not really friends with each other, but they were both
They're both friends with Steve.
Friends. In fact, they're possibly Steve Rogers' two best friends. His best friend from his young pre-Frozen days and his best friend from his
thought out days.
And now they're mourning Steve and they're thrown together and they don't really like each other very much or trust each other. I mean, they don't dislike each other, but they don't really trust.
Well, Sam doesn't trust Bucky because Bucky was a Hydra agent.
Right.
And tried to kill him more than once and other people.
And Bucky doesn't trust Sam because Sam gave the shield away.
Right.
How could you do that?
After Steve gave Sam the shield at the end of Endgame.
Steve gave that to you. You don't have the right to give it away. And I love that there's this great dynamic. The therapy scene is one of my favorite scenes ever.
It's so funny.
It's great.
The repartee back and forth between them is so good. It is very good. And then the story itself is good. I mean, you get interesting elements.
I feel like this episode drops a whole lot of information at you in interesting ways. I mean, you've got the new Captain America, you've got the antagonist, and then you've also got the
Isaiah, super soldier,
the super soldier who nobody has ever heard of except Bucky. And there's just so much going on. It was a really well-paced episode, like lots of action, but also some good talking scenes too. Yeah.
It's a good series. I really like it. It just really takes off from here. I mean, once Baron Zemo shows up, you have that 3-part weird relationship going on. So other things that I've watched, because you haven't watched TV, I watched the first episode of Prehistoric Planet on Apple TV Plus, which has Sir David Attenborough narrating it, like Blue Planet and other Planet Earth and other series, nature series, but it's dinosaurs, and they have this really awesome CG. It's really good. It's not just like Jurassic Park, which is weird because Sir David Attenborough, his brother was in Jurassic Park.
Was he?
Richard Attenborough. He was the guy who owned Jurassic Park.
Right. Richard and David are brothers.
They're brothers. And so it's kind of weird when he's talking, you kind of hear Richard Attenborough a little bit with the dinosaurs. But it's different from Jurassic Park because it's more Jurassic Park ups the ante on the gore, the excitement. This is much more like a nature documentary. So it really tones it down a lot. I mean, there's certainly red tooth and claw, savagery, things getting eaten and that sort of thing, but it's not like hyped up to make it scary or more bloody, gory. It's much more like a nature documentary, and so I kind of like it. The first episode is called Coasts, and they cover all kinds of the dinosaur life along the coastlines and in the oceans, which you don't really see a lot. I mean, most times people talk about dinosaurs, it's all the land animals. So you have like the various flying ones, you have the swimming ones, you have this whole thing about how T-Rexes could swim. They used to swim to islands because their bones
elephants?
they're like elephants in the Andaman Islands. Their bones were hollow.
Their bones were hollow.
They were very light. The bones, so they could swim.
It's so funny because I think of T-Rexes as being like these very heavy, ponderous creatures.
Because in Jurassic Park, the thing would walk and it would be a tremor. Exactly.
Right.
In fact, T-Rex could sneak up on you.
Right. And the whole thunder. I mean.
Yeah. And the whole the bellowing roar that's all made up. Of course, we don't know what they would have sounded like. So
although I saw
they could have squeaked a little bit.
I thought I saw an interesting thing online some time ago that was talking about trying to recreate the sounds that I can't remember what animal it was by like blowing air through the recreated nasal passages.
That was in Jurassic Park 2 or 3.
No, I'm talking about like an actual series.
Okay,
like,
but they might have gotten the idea from that because in that they were 3D printing like the nasal cavity of the Velociraptor and then ended up using it as a way to call the Velociraptors. I think that was in Jurassic 3. But
I never saw that one.
Yeah. So it's a thing that was in the movies, but yeah, I'm sure there's ways if you understand the shape of the skull, you could probably recreate the sound of things.
Actually, I also saw something recently online where they recreated the voice box of a mummy. Like 3D printed.
Oh yeah, they 3D printed the mummy's voice.
But
box.
he could only make because it's just like a solid piece. They could only make one sound. It was like a ah. Yeah. It was really weird. It was silly.
It wasn't like It was ah. It was really high pitched squeak.
But it definitely sounded human, like recognizably human. It was not a mechanical sound or a instrumental sound, but it was just like the one note, like somebody gasping in surprise.
It was you've made me talk again after thousands of years. So what else I watched? I watched also on Apple TV, Tehran, which is a spy series that features like an Israeli spy in Tehran, Iran, and there's a lot of like Farsi and Hebrew and very little English. So there's a lot of reading of the screen, which is not my favorite thing, but it's a good tense spy thriller. Glenn Close joined the cast for season 2, which is interesting. That is looking good for season 2. The season 1 was good, and so season 2 is looking good. I've only watched the first one of that. I also watched the first episode of the new season, the 4th season of Stranger Things.
I heard that got a lot of negative reviews.
Yeah, that's gone full on horror. Like they've in fact the Duffer brothers who make it talked about the fact that as the kids grow up, the show gets grimmer and darker. And
I'm not sure that that's what people want.
I think what made the first 2 seasons good was it was about these young kids and their innocence and their kind of earnestness, and there was a bit of fun in the midst of the danger and excitement and the creatures that they were dealing with. But in this one, it's like this gruesome devil figure, and there's this scene of almost like an out of The Exorcist, and it's very like dark, and the kids are kind of they're in high school now, and they're kind of high school kids, which means they're kind of more annoying. I hate to say it. I don't know. I might watch a few more episodes, but
it almost sounds like they're trying to do sort of a Harry Potter, where Harry Potter got darker and darker.
Exactly, as he got older.
Which, on the one hand, I kind of understand. Like, there's a long tradition of stories about child protagonists, and the books grow as the child grows, and they become more complex, and the narratives become more complex as the person grows up. I mean, Anne of Green Gables did that. Little House on the Prairie did that. Betsy Tacy did that. So there's a long tradition of that, but I'm not sure I want to see it with scary as much as so much like watching people just
grow is in a normal way. Yeah. I don't know. It feels like they're trying hard. This is very important to Netflix. Stranger Things was one of the big breakout hits for Netflix in the mid-teens. And as Netflix needs it to be a big success. And I feel like they're trying to push the envelope a bit. Even just the way they're releasing it. They released most of the first of this season, on the, Friday of Memorial Day weekend. And then they're holding the last 2 episodes till July to build hype, to get people to subscribe for 2 months instead of 1. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. And they're very long episodes. All the episodes are over an hour. The final episode is going to be over 2.5 hours. So
it's like a movie.
Yeah, just in itself. So I'll try to work my way through it, but I don't know how far I'm going to get, because I don't like horror movies. So I was having a hard time watching it just last night by myself at night in the dark, lonely office. Oh, I don't like horror movies. Anyway, so you didn't watch anything besides the stuff we watched together, but you did finish your book.
I finished my book, Brisbane, and I really, really liked it. So much so that I actually went out and got the next book. Another book by the author, The Aviator, which I'm also really liking so far. So Brisbane was really a very meditative sort of book, but it wasn't like lacking in action. But if you like fast-paced books, it's probably not going to be for you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very much about music and memory and death and, surprisingly, faith, which I sort of thought that I was not surprised that the historical novel set in medieval Russia was a story about faith, because, well, it's the medieval world. Faith is natural. You can't really tell a medieval story faithfully without having the element of faith, especially in medieval Russia. I mean, that's just, it's part of the DNA, but this is a very modern story. It takes place, I think he's born in 1966, and it takes place sort of, the narrative unfolds with a biographer telling his childhood, young adult years, etc., and then a first person narrator twisting through where he's telling his contemporary story, like 2013, 2014. And so there's this whole idea of memory that's going on as he sort of recounts his childhood to the biographer. But then there's also the loss, because he's got Parkinson's and he's a world famous musician, like rich and famous, and he's declining. He's losing his ability to play. And so the contemporary narrative is this arc of him getting the diagnosis and playing his last concerts. You know, this is it. This is his last gasp. And so there's this, dealing with death a lot, but the death comes into his childhood memories too, in really interesting ways, as he, as a child, comes to deal with death. But one of the main way he deals with death as a child is by becoming religious. His grandfather takes him to church, and he makes a profession of faith and is baptized, and he continues to be a religious man through his life. You see it in his university years when he's it's during the 80s in St. Petersburg. So they're having the mandatory communist class on Lenin, and the teacher is having everybody stand up and denounce, say, I don't believe in God. And he's there sitting on tenterhooks, like, what am I going to do when they call on me? Like, he's thinking of, he's facing this martyrdom moment. And then when he meets his wife, she ends up converting so that they can have a church wedding, because it's important to them to have a wedding in the church, not just the legal ceremony. So it was interesting in the faith was not, it was an important element of the story. It was not a driving element. And there's not a lot of internal, like, exploration of piety or devotion, but it was there and present in interesting ways.
Interesting. And so you started The Aviator by the same
Vodolaskin. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong.
Right.
It's Russian. The Aviator is really interesting. It's one of the classic trope. Guy wakes up in a hospital room and doesn't know who he is. He doesn't remember his own name. He doesn't remember his own memories. And the doctor hands him a notebook and tells him to try to write down whatever he can remember. But what's interesting is that he seems to have been born in the year 1900, and all of his memories are old Russia, like pre-communist,
right?
Tsarist Russia is what he's remembering from his childhood, and he still doesn't. We're getting very, very fragmentary memories of his childhood. And like things where like he just remembers flashes of things and you don't know how anything connects to anything else. It's just like a broken mirror. And then intercut with bits from the hospital room and his interactions. And the only people he's seen so far are this one doctor and one nurse. And you don't know when the contemporary story is, but there's a sense in which they're worried that he's been unconscious for a very, very long time and is going to be disoriented by modern technology. Like they're very careful about breaking it to him that man has been on the moon. And the nurse initially hides the ballpoint pen. So how long has this guy been unconscious?
That sounds like at least 50 something years.
And so it's very, like, you don't know why he's been unconscious, what's happened to him. It's kind of mysterious as it's unfolding. It reminds me a little bit of Piranesi, actually, in terms of reading the journals of a narrator who doesn't have memories of his own past.
Interesting.
So.
All right. So that's what we've been reading and watching. Let's talk a little bit about Ascension Thursday. So we mentioned that we'd gone to Mass with Father Sean Carey, and I wanted to mention a story he told in the homily. So he talked about as a child, his dad would go on business trips, and he has remembered the story of Jesus being caught up into the clouds, going up to heaven. And so one time when he was a little boy, they took his dad to the airport, he and his mom.
Said he was about 4 or 5.
Yeah. Took him to the airport, and they saw him off at the gate. Back in those days, you could do that. And they watched the plane take off, and it went up, and it went into the clouds, and he started bawling his eyes out because he thought his dad was going to heaven now, because that's what Jesus did. He went up into the clouds and went to heaven, and he thought his dad was leaving and not coming back.
And his poor mom had to try to explain to him that, no, he's just, the plane's going to come back.
So I just thought that was a funny story of a little kid misunderstanding the Bible stories. And then the other thing I want to mention was today, because we had the 7th Sunday of Easter readings, which nobody outside of New England or the Northeast heard. And I forgot to pull them up, but it's the martyrdom of St. Stephen, which is very interesting. The martyrdom of St. Stephen, the
Revelation,
the book of Revelation, where the end of it, where you have the Stephen filled with the Holy Spirit, looking up to heaven and saw the glory of God. And then that was the first reading. The second reading is John hearing a voice saying, "Behold, I am coming soon, and I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." And the Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Let the hearers say, "Come." Okay. So, and then you have the gospel of Jesus praying, "Holy Father, I pray not only for them, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, so that they may all be one." And there's a theme or topic that Deacon Bob pulled out of it, of unity. This idea of unity, oneness through the Spirit. The Spirit is the person of unity in the Trinity. The Spirit unites the Father and the Son. The Spirit unites the church and God. It is that principle of unity. And one of the things you said that kind of made me think, which was, you talked about, like, at the Tower of Babel, humanity was united. We had one language, and we worked together, and we were building a tower so we could get to heaven on our own without the need of God. We could do it ourselves. And God confused them, and he broke that unity. There was disunity. He
talked about there being a good kind of unity and a bad kind of unity.
Right.
And, like, the attempts of human societies to create unity, one world order, through Nazism or communism or other these ideologies. And
unity without God.
Right. So basically, with God, unity is a good thing. But without God, when we try to impose unity on our own terms, it's broken.
It always ends up bad. So you have the Tower of Babel on one hand, and then he says on the other hand, you have Pentecost, where the Spirit unconfuses the language, where the people can of all the different languages can understand the apostles, and because now that the Spirit has come, the Spirit is our new Tower of Babel, in a sense, the tower that will bring us up to God. God is giving us that way together in the unity of the church to get to heaven. The church is the Tower of Babel, in a sense, the real tower to heaven. So I thought that was good.
I liked also what he said about Stephen, where he said that Stephen sees the Son standing at the right hand of the Father. And he says the most of the time when we see the Son and the Father in the heavenly throne room, the Son sits at the right hand of the Father. But with Stephen, it's the only time we see the Son standing. And he says that when the King stands, it is a singular honor. It is to show honor to a person. And so that this is Jesus honoring Stephen's martyrdom, honoring Stephen's...
The first martyr.
Stephen's sacrifice and welcoming into heaven by standing. I thought that was a detail I had never noticed before. And I thought that was really cool. I didn't know how to connect it with anything bigger. I just thought it was a really cool detail that he pulled out of the reading.
He also talks about the comparison about how the martyrdom of Stephen mirrors the crucifixion of Christ. You know, he cries out in a loud voice. He says, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Jesus
into your Father, into your hands I commend my spirit.
And then he falls to his knees and cried in a loud voice, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Right. There's a really interesting parallelism there
Yeah.
which is obviously very deliberate on the part of the gospel. It's Acts.
Luke. Deliberate on the respect of Luke. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. I think that about does it. We've gone on for long enough, and we want to, before we finish up, we'll take a moment to thank our patrons and make it possible for us to create Raising the Bets, including Charlene A., Mike D., Craig S., Dominic M., and Jeff H. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Raising the Bets and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. You'll find links from our discussion in our show notes at sqpn.com/bets. That's BETTS. Send us your feedback, including your commentary that was asked for on tipping, what you do for tipping. You can send that to our SQPN Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Send an email to bets@sqpn.com, or like I said, join our StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord, so that we can have a really fun conversation about tipping and other things that we've talked about on the show. Anyway, until next time, I'm Dom Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
Thank you for listening to Raising the Bets on StarQuest.